Hello and welcome to Pre-Sales Pathways, the podcast that showcases highly successful pre-sales professionals and the different career paths that they've taken. I'm your host, Chris Clark, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Will Savage, currently a Field CTO at AI analytics company, Omni. This is a role that many pre-sales professionals aspire to, and Will has some really interesting insights to share, both in terms of what the role actually involves, but also how to craft it, because it's a role that's often not advertised externally. So over the next 30 minutes, Will will share how he got into pre-sales in the first place, what his role as a Field CTO at Omni involves, and then last but certainly not least, Will share some of what's driven his career success so far. So that's enough from me. Let's get into the episode. Hi, Will. Thanks so much for joining us on the show today. It would be great if you could kick us off with a quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Will Savage. I am the Field CTO at Omni. Omni, we are a data analytics platform trying to do everything to help businesses be smarter with data. That's AI, that's data governance, that's Excel, spreadsheets, dashboards, that whole universe. Based in Dublin, Ireland, originally from the States, but I've been out here for about 12 years as part of my career.
Fantastic. And speaking of your career, take us right to the beginning. So I understand you started out in management consulting.
Well, my first job was stocking shelves at the news agent when I was in 8th grade. But yeah, so the first full-time job was in management consulting, which I loved. I think it's a great starting place for lots of people in the SE world. You kind of get exposure to quantitative skills, to what good client delivery looks like, lots of different industries. So, in the SE world, we need to learn about lots of different things, be able to come onto a project and very quickly learn what this customer cares about. Oh, I'm going to need to know SQL for this project. I'm going to need to know VBA for this project. I'm going to need to learn how a pharmacy plan works. I'm going to need to learn how to build a customer segmentation analysis. So lots of exposure, lots of good coaching, which I think is increasingly a struggle these days. As more people work remotely. So yeah, really good training ground for lots of careers.
Yeah, but a very large organization, right? So quite different to what you then did next. Talk us through, that move and some of the things behind it.
Yeah, so my first move into the SE world was I joined Looker when we were Series A, so I was employee about 50. And I think Deloitte, very good to learn things, lots of structure. I think one of the things that I felt was maybe a bit of a limitation was I felt like I was kind of going to have to be pushed into like a technical track or into a strategy track, which to me that difference didn't really make a lot of sense. I felt that these things worked well together. And then of course the other thing when you move into a startup, especially in the SE world, is you have instead of having one big client that you're working on as part of a team for 5-6 months, you're now juggling 10 different accounts. You're the technical owner on all of them. And so all of a sudden speed becomes this really important virtue in terms of, I'm not just trying to pad this project, I'm trying to show how something can be done as quickly as possible and, give a client a creative solution. And if I don't come up with it, no one's going to be, looking over my shoulder saying, do it that way, don't do it that way. It's either up to me to get it done or to ask for help if I think I need help. And the result's going to be in the number and the paycheck.
Yeah. That's definitely a common theme I've heard with other guests on the show that have come from a sort of implementation background. Is just it's quite different in terms of in implementation. You might be spending a lot of time with a single client. In pre-sales or solutions engineering, you get much broader exposure to a larger volume. So talk us through then. You're in this solutions engineering role at Looker. What does that sort of look like, and where do you go from there?
Yeah, so the company was growing really fast, so the team was growing well. That presented kind of some early growth opportunities. So the first thing is always just make sure you're kicking butt at your core role. My old VP Kate, you always used to say, if you're doing lots of side projects and they're great, but you're not hitting your number, no one's going to care. So obviously first thing is always doing that. But yeah, I got to kind of expand the role, moving into a team lead role, and then heard through the grapevine that the company was going to be expanding to Europe, opening up offices in the UK and then later Ireland. So I'd already done some projects that had me kind of well visible with the right people. Put my hand up, said, hey, do you want me to go help set up these offices overseas, bring some of the institutional knowledge, technical knowledge, customer context, engineering context out to Europe? They said yes. So moved out to Europe, started building a team out there, or out here rather. And yeah, the rest is kind of history.
Awesome. And I understand then with the move or subsequently to the move, you moved from a sort of like an individual contributor role into a management role. So you were managing a team for a little while at Looker.
Yeah, that's right. I was leading the solution engineering team for Europe. Also for a while, I was looking after the customer success team. I think this is one of those things around, management versus IC roles, and I don't think they're as much of a hard line as people sometimes say.
Yep.
When if you're in the company and if you're in a space where it makes sense for you to be building a team, that's a great thing to be able to do. Obviously, in my current role, I'm sort of back in kind of a senior IC, Field CTO type role where you're where I'm not managing a team, and I think there's great benefit in both of those, and I think the benefits are actually quite a bit more transferable than are often said. But yeah, I loved building a team. I think I got great satisfaction out of seeing people who came from backgrounds very often similar to myself, who we could kind of coach into what it looks like to be a great SE. Seeing them learn to close deals on their own without my involvement. I think that's a great moment of satisfaction as a leader when you see your team doing things that you actually had nothing to do with, because that tells you that you've hired the right people, that your systems and processes are working, and you're not just trying to touch everything, because that's not going to scale, right? So seeing those systems and processes scale is very rewarding.
Yeah, agreed. And so how was it that you ended up from the management role at Looker to your current role in Omni?
Yeah, so after Looker had gotten acquired by Google, I stayed on for a couple of years, helped kind of guide through the integration, and then just felt like I kind of wanted a break. So I'd been there for 8 years. So I took a little sabbatical after the pre-sales world, went and spent a while sort of in true startup land. So I was working for an online wine startup actually called WineSpark. It was just me and the CEO. I think oftentimes, especially in Silicon Valley, we think of startups as, VC backed, YC, Series A, Series B type roles. And, when you have an actual 2-person company that has no VC money and that, I can count the cash flow and the runway on one hand, right? That's when you have that real sense of urgency and, wow, we really have to do everything super lean. We're not just going to be spending money on, random SaaS tools. So I was doing that for about 9 months. We weren't able to get the growth kind of where we were targeting. So kind of went back into the tech world. We're looking around at a couple different things, both in the IC track and the management track. Eventually got back together with the team from Omni, which was a lot of people that I'd worked with before at Looker. This company was also quite early, but doing really well. I liked the product direction. I liked the founders. I liked all the people I was going to be working with. And I think one of the best bets you can make when picking a job in a career is to bet on growth, because when you're on a I hate the word rocket ship, it's very cliche, but when you're on a rocket ship, there's so many more opportunities to kind of expand your scope and your role, and that's just the easiest hack for career growth is just to be on the team that's winning, and I thought Omni was going to be winning, so that's where I ended up.
And digging into that in a bit more detail, because the move to Omni, you didn't move straight into the Field CTO role, right?
No, that's right. I moved back just sort of into like a standard IC role. I think partially it was just the people management kind of track that would have been kind of the conventional move was sort of covered. I think there's always that, you're whenever you're looking at roles, you're always trying to find that intersection of, well, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What are the skills I want to grow, and what does the company need? Obviously, if you can get all three of those at the same time, that's a bonus. But yeah, I think it was, so I just went back into an IC role. I was like, look, I really enjoyed IC work when I was doing it. I know that, or I was very confident I could do it well, and I was willing to bet on myself, and especially thinking that as the company grew, I felt that there would be opportunities to figure out, well, whether that ended up meaning leading a team or doing kind of something more senior on the go-to-market side. I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be, but I had a feeling, look, if I get into here, kick butt, continue to make myself visible, work on important projects, show results, and the growth is there in the company, there will be shots on goal.
Yeah. And clearly it paid off, right? So it's a nice segue into your current role as a Field CTO. I mean, speaking to people in pre-sales and solutions engineers, I know particularly those that are on the IC track, this is often for them the dream role, right? It's what they're aspiring to, that they would love to be in that sort of role. But I don't know that there's a ton of clarity around what exactly it involves, probably varies by company. So we'd love if you could just give us a sort of flavor of what the Field CTO looks like at Omni in particular?
Yeah, sure. So, Omni, we're Series C, we're growing very fast, and so I think it's very much adapt the role to the company, because you're right there. You do have field CTO roles that are more aligned to marketing, more aligned to product, more aligned to sales. The way I kind of pitched and scoped and created it was kind of probably three main pillars that I'm working on at the moment. One is being that voice of the customer into our engineering org. I think AI has so dramatically changed the ship speed that very often, in engineering orgs today, one of the new bottlenecks is no longer on the ability to code, but it's on the ability to get that voice, that voice of the customer and that design sense and that input into, well, which way should we design this, kind of what optimized for what the user needs. And so being able to kind of plug into that world and iterate very quickly on those engineering loops with them has been really helpful. So that's one. Two is just trying to kind of continue to express our opinion, in the market. So whether that's with investors, analysts, customers, marketing, just trying to make sure we have a really strong point of view, because there is so much talk in the market around what people do with data and AI. You need to have an opinion. And then probably the third is kind of helping to enable and up level kind of our field, so that SEs, go to market, AEs, sort of any kind of go to market role. I think knowing that we're in a very high growth, quick moving company, I think that affects the way that you approach the role. Right? Are you thinking about big quarterly goals and OKRs and projects versus, right now it's very much, hey, where can I add 1% of value every day? And so I think, if I'm sure the way that someone at Oracle or Databricks or Snowflake would be structuring that role would probably have a lot more structure and comp plan associated to it. We're very much in the move quick and see what works phase at the moment.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, you've sort of got these three pillars that you're working on, but the company's changing so rapidly that it's key to be adaptable and to be working on, whatever's the priority for the organization at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, and at the moment, right, I think there's so much priority around, both how do we build the best AI solution for our customers, but then also how do we advise customers? Actually, this is probably a fourth pillar I should have mentioned is, how do we help kind of our most senior customers think about, how they should be deploying these solutions, not just from a technology perspective, but from how do they reorganize their teams? And part of this is us having an opinion about the best way that customers need to use this. So a lot of times what will happen is you'll have customers who, they'll have shiny new technology, but they'll also have lots of old habits from the way that a team used to work, especially if they had like a service desk model for data, lots of, report builders, lots of, ticket systems. And I think we all know that, the most frequent cause of technology projects failing to deliver the value that they are supposed to is rarely about the technology not actually doing what it says in the tin. It's not being able to align that to a way of working, to culture, to expectations, to having the right data in place that those systems can use. So really helping our customers have a good sense of the big picture of how do you roll this stuff out successfully? What does good look like? Equally, like what are things that maybe we used to do that we don't have to do anymore? The most important part of focus is knowing what not to focus on. So kind of helping our customers see, how their jobs can change in the light of this technology and not just what the technology itself is doing.
Yeah. And that's interesting, right? Because I think when people think about a field CTO and the profile for that particular role, they might default to thinking it's the most technical person in the room. It's all about, getting really deep into the technology. From what I'm hearing there, it's like a lot of the value that you're adding to the conversations isn't just around the technology, but it's the people aspect, the cultural aspect. Like what do you think about in terms of the typical background for a field CTO? What's your background like and how do you approach it?
Yeah, so I'd agree with you. I don't think it needs to be the most technical person in the room. Certainly you need to, be able to be very credible and to be able to ask the right questions. But, do you need to be the most senior enterprise architect who's designing every knob in the system? Like, probably not. And if you think about kind of who you're peer matching with in the org chart at the customer, let's be honest, they probably aren't the most in the weeds of the engineering decisions either, right? They're going to have people who are thinking about those trade-offs. So it is, being able to kind of have that big picture. I think you lean into what your strengths as well. And so again, I'm sure there are other field CTOs who would have a different answer than me. I think that I'm personally very big bringing in that business consulting background from Deloitte and from other places where if we're talking about aviation, I want to be having a conversation about planes and not pixels, right? So let's talk about how we're going to use data to increase your load factors. Let's talk about how we're going to plan your hedging strategy for fuel costs. If we are talking about mobile apps, let's talk about how you're using data to balance your in-game economy. Let's talk about how you're balancing the choices of whether or not to use in-app purchases versus advertising, and how do you find that balance of where you can monetize users without losing users through engagement and churn, right? And like those are the kinds of decisions that technical leaders, when they're at companies, when they're doing their jobs well, they're aligning with their business teams to say, look, the data access is table stakes, right? Yes, the data needs to be trusted and it needs to be accurate, it needs to be accessible. But then so what, right? How do we actually partner with businesses or with our business partners to build quantitative literacy, to help walk through the end-to-end decision-making process around, well, look, we have a lever that we can pull, whether it's on marketing or routing or a product decision. Let's walk through that whole decision process end to end. And if you can't get to actually pulling a lever at the end of the day, then it's just technology for technology's sake. And so I think really helping customers along that journey and, breaking some old habits sometimes that have just been, we just build a bunch of dashboards and the business takes the dashboards and, we never see them again. When you can break those habits and really increase the relevance of the customers, with their executive peers, that's where you get really successful outcomes.
Yeah. And on that topic of sort of changing habits and things changing more generally, obviously AI is top of mind for everyone, will be top of mind for your customers. A lot of SEs or people in a pre-sales role are going to be thinking about how AI is going to shape these roles that they might potentially be moving into. Have you got a point of view on that around, how's it changing the field CTO role? Is the field CTO's role still relevant in a world of AI?
Yeah, well, I think it has a massive impact in sort of how we do business internally, as well as kind of the advice we need to give our customers. So, even just internally, just to give one example, I was doing a meeting with some folks from a news company, and they're very focused on advertising revenue and inventory slots and fill rates and different tiers of markets. I can spend 5 minutes in Claude generating a really interesting data set that when we go to them, right, it's not, oh, imagine your data in this kind of system, right? It's like we can actually show a realistic decision pathway from, here's some source data, here's how, you build those insights, here's the actual action and that lever that we were talking about that someone could be able to pull. And so I think the standard for what you should be delivering keeps going up. Customer expectations are certainly going up, right? They're not having to go through 20 meetings before they get access to some of this information. And frankly, your competitors are probably doing this too. I think another good lesson from my early SE days at Looker was, it's not always the best technology that wins. Very often it's the best sales experience. It's the most hustle. It's, if I can show you a customized solution in 2 hours and my competitor took 2 weeks, who are you going to choose? It's a pretty easy call.
And for data is so important, right? It's like very difficult for people to imagine what the solution would feel like if the data is not in there and it's not relevant to them.
Yeah, and some people can, but right, are you going to leave that to the chance and to the customer, or are you just going to connect those dots for them, right? Like don't make the customer do the work. Take it on yourself.
Yeah. Cool. And so, we talked about some of the roles that you've done. The field CTO role, as I said, is for a lot of people is really going to be like the ideal role, right? So you've had this hugely successful career. I would love to know, were there 2 to 3 habits that you would pick out that you attribute some of that success to?
There's a lot that I think you build over the course of your career, right? And so I think, I think there's kind of a meta habit, which is the ability to learn from various projects and mentors and experiences that go well, that don't, and to really kind of build this permanent catalog of skills, of business models, of techniques. I mean, so if you so like I've had, I've had managers tell me like, hey, this presentation is awful, or this Excel model you built is awful. Like, imagine that you received this in, that you're reading this and the person who built it isn't sitting next to you. That's how you need to think about every deliverable, is that you're not there to explain it. I'm like, okay, cool. That goes in the memory bank. I had a training exercise at Deloitte where you had to give like a mock presentation at the end of a project. And I remember the partner who I was delivering it to, they were like, Will, you gave a very smooth presentation, but I felt like you were selling me a Buick instead of trying to have a conversation. I was like, okay, yep, heard. That goes in the memory bank, right? So, things like, learning to ask a simple question and then shut up. And like the difference between questions and elicitations in terms of how do you get customers to kind of keep talking past, an initial surface level, value discovery. You say, huh, that must be hard. And then they keep going and they tell you what's really going on, right? So you have all those little habits around kind of ways of working. So I think, maybe it's a boss you liked, maybe it's a boss you didn't like, maybe it's a project that didn't go well, but I think there's so many little habits that you can kind of just take along the way. If you're lucky enough to have people giving you great feedback, right, cherish them. But if not, like go seek that out. So I think that's one for sure, is kind of just building those sort of working habits. I also think it's just really helpful spending any time you can kind of outside of the software world and the SE world. Again, if I think about, when I was sort of at the online wine startup, when I was, I had to put together whatever data I needed for all of our growth projects. My budget was $0. And so, coming from a world where we're asking companies to pay $50, $100, $200, $300,000 a year for data solutions, well, are we delivering that much value more than what I was able to hack together for free? Now, obviously, two-person company, right? The requirements are not the same. But there's this kind of notion I like to play with called reverse dog food. Everyone talks about dog fooding your own product, which I think is great to make sure your product is really good. But I think reverse dog fooding is, how far can I get without my own product? And does our go-to-market message and differentiation really stand up if I try and get away without using our products, and seeing is that there that incremental delta? So kind of being your own best BS meter. If you have that suspicion that maybe this value isn't quite right, like your clients will smell it a mile away. So I think kind of being your own harshest critic can be really helpful.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. I remember having been at Slack for a while, and we used Slack, the tool internally. We really did eat our own dog food, but it was quite interesting then moving to an organization where you don't have it at all, and it was like, wow, I'm now on the outside, no longer drinking the Kool-Aid, and I really miss this thing. And it gives you that conviction that actually it was very helpful. I know you talked earlier on as well about the sort of the difference between the IC track and the management track, and actually there being sort of more similarity between the two than most people would maybe give credit for. Did you have anything else to share there around like leadership and how that relates to the IC role?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's lots of ways to lead. And, I think leadership is a much broader concept than just people management. So, in an IC role, right, you can be a mentor to younger team members, and maybe it's even just a BDR who wants to learn how to ask some good discovery questions. Maybe it's a new SE who is very technical, but is new to demoing, right? And, if you think about, what I said in terms of taking the lessons that have helped you and kind of putting that in your permanent memory box, right? Do the same for the teams around you, and pay it forward. And that stuff absolutely pays dividends. When you build that brand of, here's the person who is known for helping teams and helping people grow, that's leadership, right? If it's organizing things in the office, if it's building an AI skill that your entire team can use, if it's saying, oh well, I'm gonna help build us a new demo data set, I'm gonna build us a new go-to-market offering, I'm gonna build a customer-facing FAQ on this topic that we get questions about all the time. All of those build, first of all, they're rewarding. They scale your impact, and they build your brand. And so, I think just it's all just part of being, a good professional, right? And a well, and someone who's adding value kind of across the team. And when there are opportunities, because I think we all know, in the real world, most of the best opportunities are not the things that are necessarily advertised, but the people who have been doing those things are absolutely the people who leaders are going to think of when there's kind of a new and bigger challenge.
Yeah, I love that phrase around scaling your impact. I think that's something that ultimately anyone can do in any role, right? You don't need to be formally in a line management role. So we heard about sort of some of your career success and what's driven that so far. Would love to hear a challenge that you've had in your career and what you learned from that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the working at the 2-person wine startup was definitely some of the hardest I've worked in. Some of the most challenging work I had, right? Some of that was just down to, okay, I'm sort of in this new role, so I was running growth, and I think when you're in pre-sales, it's easy to take for granted, oh well, here's the pipeline coming in that I need to work. Generating pipeline is really, really hard, especially if you're kind of doing it yourself and you're not relying on programmatic outbound and paid channels, or you have a really well-known brand that's like, oh, everyone knows that they need DBT, so they just come and ask us for DBT, and we tell them about the different pricing options, right? So that I need to be on every street corner shouting as loudly as I can. I think was really good for building discipline. My CEO made me read this book, which was again another one in the permanent sort of skill bank, called Go for No, which the concept is, it's not just about saying I need to get used to hearing no and rejection as part of building pipeline, but actually this idea of, if I orient my goal as to say, oh, I need to get 50 no's a week, that's great, because if you haven't heard no, it means you haven't pushed the boundary far enough. And there's this really like good analogy of someone who's like working in the clothing store, and they sell like 2,000 worth of clothes to some customer, and then the VP is like, well, what didn't he buy? Like, what do you mean? He bought everything I sold him. And they say, well, then how did you know you sold him as much as you could if he didn't say no to anything? I'm like, okay, yeah. So actually seeing this idea of going past what you should be doing and getting to those no's as a goal in and of itself, I think was this really helpful way to frame it. But I mean, look, it's super challenging. I found it easier to get people to sign 6-figure BI contracts than to get customers to sign up for a €10 a month wine plan. But yeah, just huge respects for the craft of outbound and pipeline management. But I think that also then helps me now be like a really good partner with my sales counterparts, right? I think any SE who hasn't grumbled in the background to another SE about, oh, what does my AE actually do, right? If you haven't done that, then you're just lying. Like, we know you have. And sure, it's fun to make those jokes, but not only being able to respect it, but being able to understand it and really live it, and and contribute to it as well, right? You're part of a team, and as I said, if you and the AE are both crushing it, and you're both delivering technical solutions, if you're both building pipeline, even if you have different specialties, you as a team is going to crush it. And again, all goes to that rising tide is gonna lift all boats.
Yeah, I could relate to that a lot. I setting up my own business now, I'm responsible obviously for outbound and that sort of thing as well. It's given me so much more sympathy for the work that sales reps had to do or have to do. I know a lot of people are thinking about, like SEs currently are thinking about maybe they transition into that type of role, but that outbound bit in particular, the rejection, is the sort of thing that I think SEs don't necessarily get that much exposure to it. So super interesting.
And there's a few SEs who actually so I'm still like doing some individual account work as well, kind of in addition to sort of the Field CTO work. And actually the AE that I work with used to be an SE who worked for me and my team. So I've had like lots of these people who've gone and made that transition, and a lot of them have done it very successfully. Some people have tried it and said, it's not for me. And so it's a totally valid path, but yeah, definitely not not a trivial one. And just because you see your AE on a demo and think, oh, I could do that, like, okay, that's about 3% of their job.
Yeah, yeah. And on that point around advice to other SEs, is there any advice you would give more broadly to SEs, in particular SEs thinking about, or aspiring to a field CTO role?
Yeah, I think probably just say yes to as many things as you can, especially earlier in your career. I think, and there's always contradictory advice, and it doesn't always seem like it lines up on paper, because sometimes people say, oh, as part of being a good SE, you need to learn to say no to unqualified ops, learn to focus your time. And that's absolutely true, especially kind of, when you're more senior and you have more people asking for your time. But, as you're thinking about building your brand, and as you're thinking about building your expertise, you never know looking forwards which projects, which relationships are going to be the ones that yield something. And so, it's all about, if you do a project and it whiffs, right, whatever, it's not the end of the world. But if you miss the opportunity and then someone else is doing that, that's going to be a much higher cost. I think I was talking to an old career mentor from Deloitte at one point, and we were talking about where I wanted to bring my career, and I made the comment of like, oh, I always hear it's not what you know, it's who you know. And he's like, well, no, that's also wrong. It's not who you know, it's who knows you, right? And it's just being known for doing great work. Obviously, part of that is you need to brand and market yourself and make yourself visible, but you also need to kind of have the fundamentals and the actual projects to back that up. And so if you think about you're not going to know looking forward which exactly are going to be the things that lead interesting places, but if you maximize your shots on goal, you maximize your visibility, worst case scenario, you learn a bunch of stuff, and very likely looking backwards, you'll be able to connect some dots and say, hey, these things that I took a chance on, actually did pay these dividends. I mean, in my case, that might be the move to Europe. It might be, certain people that I worked with, projects that led to more full-time roles. But I mean, everyone's version of that will be different, and you don't know if you're not putting yourself out there.
Yeah. And that point around building a brand and who knows you, I think that's really important for the field CTO role in particular, right? Because this is a role that it's not that often advertised externally. It's like often something that you'll need to, as you did, build the case for that internally. And a big part of that is the right stakeholders in that decision having visibility into you, having the confidence in you in order to make that case.
Yeah, exactly. I think in my case, it was a combination of making the case that the role should exist along, simultaneously as to why, I thought I'd be successful at doing it. But yeah, certainly, you need that starting point of credibility, and that very often, as you say, these things are not going to be advertised. And so if you're not the one who's being talked about behind closed doors when the conversation's taking place, you're starting a few steps behind.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredibly interesting conversation. A couple of takeaways I wanted to call out. Firstly, earlier on, you were talking about how to think about the scope or the field CTO role generally. It's not necessarily the most technical person in the room, but thinking about who you're peer matching with at the other side in the customer's organization, the types of topics they might be interested in. As you said, that's could be about the people change, cultural change, but it's more the strategic topics as opposed to down in the detail. And then also this point around maximizing shots on the goal. I really like that. Obviously, you have to balance that tension of what not to take on, but really being the person that has a reputation for taking on the right projects and executing well. I think that's incredibly helpful advice.
Yeah, makes sense.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Fantastic. Cheers. Cool. Well,
thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye. To everyone tuned in, thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please do follow or subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. If you've got a friend or a colleague that you think would find it useful, please do share it with them. And last but not least, if you'd be interested in being on the show yourself, please do register your interest at chrisjamesclark.co.uk/podcast. Thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.